The night was heavy with rain, the kind that blurs the world into streaks of silver and shadow. Dr. Elijah Carter's car sliced through the storm, wipers beating a desperate rhythm against the windshield. The dashboard clock glowed 11:48 p.m., 12 minutes to midnight, 12 minutes before the heart of a young boy in St. Mary's Hospital might stop beating forever. Elijah's hands gripped the steering wheel tight. His pager had gone off 20 minutes ago, code blue, cardiac failure, Dr. Carter needed immediately. The boy's name was Marcus, 12 years old. Asthma complications had spiraled into a sudden cardiac arrest. Elijah had treated the kid before, a bright smile, too much energy for his small lungs. "I'll be your Dr. Hero," the boy had said once, holding up his action figure with a grin. Elijah had laughed then, but tonight, Marcus was the one waiting for his hero. The doctor's tires hissed across the wet asphalt. He whispered a silent prayer. "Hold on, kid, just hold on." He was only 5 miles away. He could make it. Then, out of nowhere, blue and red lights exploded behind him. The sudden glare stabbed through the rain. Elijah's heart sank. "No, no, not now," he muttered. The siren wailed once, demanding obedience. He checked his speed, 72 in a 55. He had been pushing it, yes, but it wasn't reckless, not for this. He slowed, pulled over to the side, and took a deep breath. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his hospital ID badge on the passenger seat. He rehearsed what he'd say, calm, clear, polite. "Officer, I'm a doctor. Emergency call. Please, just let me go." A flashlight beam sliced through the rain and landed on his face. The officer approached, tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform dark with rain. His name tag read H. Daniels. The face behind the beam was pale and cold, jaw tight with suspicion. "License and registration," he said sharply. "Yes, officer, but please, I'm a doctor on call. There's a child waiting for me at St. Mary's. It's an emergency." Daniel squinted at him. "A doctor, huh?" His voice dripped skepticism. "At midnight? In a beat-up Toyota?" Elijah forced a thin smile. "I know it looks odd, sir, but I'm telling you the truth. Here's my ID." He held up the badge, the words Dr. Elijah Carter, cardiothoracic surgeon, glinting faintly in the light. But Daniels didn't take it. He only frowned. "Step out of the vehicle." Elijah's breath hitched. "Officer, please, every second counts. If I don't get there now, that boy... Out! Now!" The tone left no room for negotiation. Rain drummed against Elijah's shoulders as he stepped into the cold. Daniel circled him slowly, like a hawk assessing prey. "You said you're a doctor. Where's your white coat? Where's your hospital car pass?" "I came from home. I was asleep when they called. Please, I can prove it. Call the hospital. Talk to the chief." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You people always got a story, don't you?" The words stung more than the rain. Elijah's jaw tightened. He had heard that tone before, not the words, but the poison beneath them. "Officer," he said softly, "I don't want trouble. Just let me go. There's a boy." Daniels interrupted, stepping closer. "You think you can speed through my district in the middle of the night because you've got a fancy story? Maybe you stole that badge. Maybe you're running drugs." Elijah's patience cracked for a second. "I'm telling you the truth. Please, just call the hospital." The officer's face hardened. "Turn around. Hands on the car." Elijah froze. His heart raced. "What?" "You heard me. Officer, this is insane. I'm not resisting. I'm trying to save a life." Daniel stepped forward and grabbed his wrist. The doctor flinched, the cold steel of handcuffs biting his skin. Lightning tore across the sky, white and furious. In that blinding flash, something broke. Not in the storm, but inside Elijah. A lifetime of composure, of respect, of swallowing pride just to stay safe. All of it trembled. But he stayed still. Because shouting wouldn't help. Because rage never saved a life. He stared at the rain pooling beneath his shoes and whispered, "You're stopping me from saving a child." Daniel said nothing. He radioed in the stop. Suspicious male, dark clothing, possible impersonation, vehicle search. The minutes crawled. Each one felt like a heartbeat lost. At St. Mary's, nurses were shouting, "Where's Dr. Carter? He was supposed to be here 10 minutes ago." The monitors screamed warnings as Marcus's pulse flickered. The chief surgeon, Dr. Patel, called Elijah's number. No answer. Another nurse tried again. Nothing. Back on the roadside, Elijah sat in the back of the police car, rainwater dripping down his sleeves. He looked out at the blurred lights, at the world moving without him. He thought of Marcus's mother, waiting in that cold hallway, whispering prayers. He thought of his own mother, too, how she used to hold his face after every insult he faced growing up. You don't fight hate with hate, Elijah. You rise higher, you keep doing good. That's how you win. But tonight, he wasn't sure he was winning. Daniels returned, tossing a flashlight into the passenger seat. "Car's clean," he muttered into the radio. "Nothing suspicious." Then, turning to Elijah, "So, tell me, Doc, what kind of hospital needs heart surgery at midnight?" Elijah's voice was low. "A dying one." The answer hung in the air like thunder that never broke. Daniels hesitated, just for a moment. He looked at the soaked man before him, eyes filled not with defiance but desperation. Something human flickered there, then died under duty. "Sit tight," he said, closing the door. Elijah turned away, pressing his forehead against the window. "Please," he whispered, though no one could hear. At 12:27 a.m., dispatch finally came through. Daniels listened absently as the voice crackled. "Be advised, all units, St. Mary's Hospital requesting immediate escort for Dr. Elijah Carter, life-threatening emergency, cardiac arrest, minor patient." The words froze him. He looked up at the man sitting silently in his back seat. "Say that again," Daniels muttered. Dispatch repeated it, slower this time. "Repeat, escort needed for Dr. Elijah Carter. He's not answering his phone. Repeat." Daniel's stomach dropped. He turned toward Elijah, who sat motionless, eyes hollow. For the first time that night, the officer saw him. Not the color of his skin, not the rain or the car or the badge, but the truth he had refused to see. Without a word, he unlocked the cuffs. The metal clicked open. "Get in the front," he said quietly. Elijah blinked. "It's too late." "Get in." They sped off, sirens howling through the empty streets. The rain parted before them like a curtain. Daniel's hands gripped the wheel as if he could drive through time itself. But inside, both men knew, sometimes even the fastest siren can't outrun the cost of ignorance. They reached St. Mary's at 12:39 a.m. Nurses rushed forward, pulling Elijah from the car. He ran inside, soaked, exhausted, trembling. He didn't stop to explain, didn't look back. Daniels followed a few steps behind, breath ragged, watching as the doctor vanished into the surgical wing. For the first time that night, the officer's heart pounded not with control, but with shame. He stood alone in the fluorescent hallway, watching nurses move with urgent precision. Every beep from the monitors cut deeper. Every shout of "clear" echoed in his chest. Time blurred again. He didn't know how long he waited. 10 minutes? 30? A lifetime? Then a nurse came out slowly, eyes downcast. Elijah followed a moment later, shoulders slumped, face pale beneath the hospital lights. His gloves were still on. There was blood on them. Daniel stepped forward. "Doctor?" Elijah looked at him, eyes red but steady. "He didn't make it," he said quietly. The hallway fell silent, except for the distant hum of machines. Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Elijah's voice was calm, almost too calm. "You didn't want to." Then he walked past him, down the hall, disappearing into a shadowed corridor where the world couldn't see him break. Daniel stood there drenched in fluorescent guilt, realizing that sometimes the law can be blind, but so can a man's heart. Outside, the storm finally began to fade, but its echo remained, in the sirens that had come too late, and then the conscience of one officer who would never again see a speeding black man as a threat, but as a life that might be saving another. The hospital corridor was eerily quiet. The storm outside had eased into a drizzle, tapping softly against the tall windows. Officer Daniels stood there, his shoes leaving muddy marks on the sterile white floor, but he couldn't move. His heart was still beating in the rhythm of the siren that had come too late. Elijah had disappeared somewhere down the hallway, his figure swallowed by the dim lights and distant voices. For a long moment, Daniels just stood, staring at the double doors that had closed behind the doctor, the ones that had failed to keep death from slipping through. A nurse passed by, muttering to another, "Poor kid, Dr. Carter did everything he could." The words landed like stones in Daniel's stomach. He wanted to leave, to vanish, to undo the last hour of his life, but guilt has a way of gluing a man's boots to the ground. He turned slowly toward the reception desk. The woman there was young, her hair tucked beneath a blue surgical cap. When she noticed him, her expression hardened immediately. She had seen his uniform. "Can I help you, officer?" Daniels hesitated. "That doctor, Carter, is he all right?" The woman's jaw tightened. "He's in the chapel." She pointed toward a small door at the end of the hall. "If you're the reason he's late, I'd stay away." He didn't respond. Words weren't his ally tonight, but his feet carried him forward anyway. The chapel was dimly lit, a single candle flickering near the altar. The air smelled faintly of lilies and disinfectant. Elijah sat alone in the front pew, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. His white coat was folded beside him, soaked and wrinkled, a faint stain of blood near the cuff. Daniel stood at the entrance, unsure if he should speak. He'd rehearsed a dozen apologies on the walk there, but none of them felt enough. Sorry felt too small a word for a boy who'd never wake up again. He cleared his throat quietly. "Dr. Carter?" Elijah didn't move. Daniels took a few steps forward. I wanted to say—" "Don't," Elijah said softly, voice hoarse. The officer froze. Elijah lifted his head slowly, eyes hollow. "Don't tell me you're sorry. That boy didn't need your apology. He needed me, and you took that away." Daniel swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I thought—" "You thought I was lying," Elijah interrupted. His tone wasn't angry, it was weary, defeated, the kind of tone that comes from a man who's explained his humanity too many times. "You saw a black man in an old car and decided he couldn't be a doctor. You saw a threat, not a healer." The words hit harder than any punch could have. Daniels lowered his head. "You're right." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint hum of rain against glass. Elijah leaned back in the pew, his voice breaking. "He was 12, officer. 12. His mother was holding his hand when his heart stopped. She looked at me like I could fix the world, but I wasn't there because you had to make sure I was good enough to save her son." Daniels tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. His chest felt tight, his vision blurring slightly. He had faced gunmen, riots, and chaos, but never this kind of fear, the kind that comes when you realize you were the danger all along. "I'm not that kind of man," Daniel said quietly, more to himself than to Elijah. "I swear I'm not." Elijah gave a bitter smile. "The thing about racism, officer, is that it doesn't need a man to be evil, just blind." Daniel sank into the pew behind him. The candlelight danced on the wall between them, two silhouettes divided by shadow. "I have a son," the officer whispered. "He's 9. Asthma too. I thought I was protecting people like him by doing my job right, but tonight I realize—" He stopped, the rest of the sentence trembling on his tongue. Elijah didn't answer. He was staring at the candle, the tiny flame reflected in his tired eyes. "I became a doctor because I wanted to prove something, not to the world, but to the ones who doubted me. Every patient I saved was supposed to erase a little of the prejudice I'd faced. But tonight I realized nothing I do will ever be enough to make some people see me differently." Daniels opened his mouth, but no sound came. He wanted to say that wasn't true, but even he didn't believe it right now. For a long time they sat in silence.
the storm outside fading into a soft drizzle. Finally, Daniel stood. "Dr. Carter, if there's anything I can do." Elijah turned toward him, expression unreadable. "You can't bring him back." "I know, but maybe I can start by doing something right." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small silver badge pinned to his chest. The metal gleamed faintly in the candlelight. "I don't deserve to wear this," he murmured. "Not after tonight." Elijah looked at him for a long time, then shook his head. "You're wrong. You should wear it, but learn what it's really supposed to mean. It's not power, it's protection. Protect people, even the ones who don't look like you." Daniels nodded slowly. "I will." The doctor stood, picking up his coat. "Then don't say sorry to me. Say it to his mother." The officer hesitated. "She won't want to see me." "She'll listen," Elijah said softly, "because she still believes in forgiveness, even when I don't." They walked down the hall together, though neither spoke. Outside the pediatric ICU, Marcus's mother sat slumped in a chair, her hands clutched around his small toy figure, the Dr. Hero that he'd once shown Elijah. When she saw them, she stood slowly. Her eyes were swollen, face streaked with tears. Elijah approached her gently. "Mrs. Green?" She nodded weakly. "You tried, didn't you?" He couldn't answer. His silence was enough. Then her gaze shifted to the uniformed man beside him. Recognition flickered, the officer who delayed everything. Her lips trembled, her hands tightening around the toy. Daniels took a cautious step forward. "Ma'am, there's nothing I can say that'll make it right. I stopped him. I wasted time, and because of that, your boy," he cracked. "I'm so sorry." For a moment, she just stared at him. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were waiting. Then slowly, she reached out and placed the toy in his hand. "Then don't waste it," she whispered. "Make sure no other mother waits like I did." Daniels blinked back tears. "I will." She turned away, collapsing into Elijah's arms. He held her quietly as she cried, his own face streaked with exhaustion and sorrow. Daniel stepped back, the small plastic figure clutched tightly in his palm. The tiny molded doctor with a bright smile stared up at him through the blur of his tears. When he finally left the hospital, dawn was breaking. The sky was painted in gray and gold, the rain finally gone. He stood by his patrol car, staring at the reflection of his face in the window, a face he barely recognized anymore. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his ticket book, and tore it in half. The sound was soft, almost meaningless against the hum of the waking city, but to him it was everything. He got in the car, radioed dispatch. "Unit 4, I'll be late to briefing. I need to stop somewhere first." "Copy that, Unit 4. Everything okay?" He looked at the toy on the passenger seat. "Not yet," he said quietly, "but it will be." He drove in silence for a long while before pulling up to a small diner near the edge of town. Inside, he saw a young black man and his son eating breakfast, laughing over pancakes. He hesitated, watching them through the glass, not with suspicion, but with something new: respect, humanity. For the first time in his life, he saw them not as strangers, not as categories, but simply as people living, loving, breathing like anyone else. He whispered to himself, "Never again." And for the rest of his shift, he meant it.
A year had passed since that stormy night, the night that carved a scar deep into the lives of everyone it touched. Officer Henry Daniels sat quietly in his patrol car on the outskirts of town, staring through the windshield at the horizon. Morning sunlight spilled across the rooftops, washing everything in soft gold. The world looked peaceful, but his heart was not. He was no longer the same man who'd once pulled over a doctor in the rain. The badge on his chest still gleamed, but it no longer felt like armor. It felt like a responsibility, heavier than ever before.
Every morning, he traced the edge of that badge with his thumb, hearing the echo of Elijah's words, "It's not power, it's protection." And every time, he swore to live by it. But guilt doesn't fade, it only changes shape. It becomes a shadow that follows you quietly, reminding you of the one life you couldn't save. After that night, Daniels had requested to be transferred from highway patrol to community outreach. His superiors were surprised, even skeptical, but he didn't care. He began volunteering at youth centers, talking to kids about law, empathy, and responsibility. He spent weekends mentoring new recruits, not about tactics or arrests, but about perspective. And every month, without fail, he visited St. Mary's Hospital. The first time he went back, he could barely walk through the lobby. The smell of antiseptic and the sound of beeping monitors tore open old memories. But he forced himself to climb the stairs to the pediatric wing. There, on the wall, was a small brass plaque. "In loving memory of Marcus Green, forever our little hero." Beneath it was a photograph of Marcus, smiling wide, holding that tiny toy doctor in his hand. Daniels had stood there for a long time that day, his vision blurring. When he finally looked down, he realized he was still holding the same toy, the one Marcus's mother had given him that night. It was worn now, the color fading, but he carried it everywhere, a reminder of what blind judgment had cost. Today was no different. As he parked near the hospital, he took the toy from his dashboard and placed it gently in his pocket. Then he stepped out into the morning air. Inside, the receptionist recognized him immediately. "Officer Daniels," she greeted softly. "Dr. Carter's foundation team is expecting you." He nodded. "Thank you." Because, after Marcus's death, Elijah Carter had not stopped. He had taken his pain and turned it into purpose. Within 6 months, he founded the Marcus Green Medical Trust, a non-profit that funded emergency care and scholarships for underprivileged kids who dreamed of becoming doctors. Daniels had been one of its earliest donors, not out of guilt, not entirely, but because he had promised himself that Marcus's name would never fade into silence. He entered the conference room where a handful of volunteers were gathered around a projector. At the front stood Elijah. He looked different now, a little older maybe, a little more tired, but still composed. His posture was calm, his voice steady as he spoke to the group. "And that's why we're expanding the program to include mobile emergency units in rural areas, because every minute matters. Every second can decide a life." Daniel stood quietly in the back, listening. It was strange. He'd imagined this moment 100 times, rehearsed what he'd say. But now, watching the doctor speak, he realized that words weren't enough. Actions were what mattered. When Elijah finally turned and noticed him, there was a brief pause. Recognition flickered across his face. The room fell silent. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Elijah gave a small nod. "Officer Daniels." "Doctor," Daniels replied quietly. The volunteers exchanged confused glances, sensing the unspoken history between them. Elijah dismissed the group, saying gently, "We'll continue this after the break." Once the room emptied, silence filled the space again. Elijah leaned against the table, folding his arms. "I didn't expect to see you here again." Daniels nodded slowly. "I come every month. The staff probably told you." "They did, but I wasn't sure if it was guilt or change that kept you coming." Daniels met his gaze. "In the beginning, it was guilt, but now, it's gratitude. You could have hated me forever. You could have ruined my career. But instead, you told me to protect better. That changed my life." Elijah studied him for a moment, then asked quietly, "And have you?" Daniels reached into his pocket and placed the small toy doctor on the table between them. "I carry this with me every day. It reminds me who I failed and who I still have a chance to protect." Elijah's expression softened. He picked up the toy, turning it over in his hands. Marcus would have liked you, you know? He said softly. Daniel smiled faintly. I wish I'd met him the right way. They stood there in quiet understanding. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but something close to it. A bridge built on shared pain. A week later, Elijah called him unexpectedly. Officer Daniels, he said over the phone, I need your help. With what? We're launching a community event next month, free heart screenings for kids. I want local officers to volunteer. I thought maybe you could lead that. Daniels blinked, taken aback. You want me to represent your foundation? Elijah replied, I want people to see that change is possible, that the same man who made a mistake can also save lives now. Daniel's voice caught. I'd be honored. The day of the event, the hospital parking lot was filled with tents, laughter, and the buzz of families gathered for checkups. Kids ran around with balloons, nurses checked vitals, and a small stage had been set up with banners reading, The Marcus Green Medical Trust, Every Second Counts. Daniel stood in uniform, but not as an enforcer, as a helper. He handed out flyers, guided parents, and knelt beside children for photos. Some recognized him from the community center, others didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was that for once, he was part of something that healed instead of hurt. Midway through the day, he saw Elijah talking to a group of kids about medicine. One of them, a little boy with bright eyes and an inhaler clipped to his shirt, raised his hand and asked, Dr. Carter, can police officers be heroes too? Elijah turned towards Daniels, who stood a few steps away. Why don't you ask him yourself? The boy ran over shyly. Mr. Officer, are you a hero? Daniels knelt, smiling softly. Not always, kid, but I'm trying to be. The boy grinned and gave him a high five. Later, when the sun began to set and the crowd thinned, Elijah approached Daniels. Thank you for coming. Daniels shook his head. No, thank you for giving me a second chance. Elijah looked at him for a long moment. We both lost something that night, Henry. But maybe we can make sure no one else does. Daniels nodded. That's a promise. They stood there watching the sky fade into gold and violet. Somewhere behind them, the sound of children laughing echoed through the air, a sound that felt like redemption. A month later, a local news outlet ran a feature titled From Tragedy to Transformation: How a Doctor and a Police Officer Changed a City. The story told of their unlikely partnership, of forgiveness and reform, of a hospital that became a symbol of hope. The final image in the article showed Daniels and Elijah standing beside a new ambulance, the first of the mobile emergency units funded by the foundation. Painted across its side were the words, The Marcus Unit, Every Life Matters. The photo captured a quiet truth. Pain had birthed purpose. But life, as it does, moved on. The years passed. Elijah continued to expand the foundation, opening clinics in underserved areas. Daniels trained new officers, teaching them empathy before authority. And every year on the anniversary of that stormy night, they both returned to the hospital chapel. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The candle was still flickering there, the same one that had burned the night Marcus died. They would sit in silence, side by side. Sometimes Elijah would whisper a prayer. Sometimes Daniels would just close his eyes and let the stillness wash over him. It was a ritual, not of sorrow, but of remembrance. One evening, years later, as Daniels locked up the community center after a long day, he saw a letter waiting on his desk. It was from Elijah. The handwriting was neat, the tone gentle. It read, Henry, if you're reading this, I may be gone. The years have been kind, but long. I wanted you to know that you did what I asked. You protected people. You saved lives. You became the man I hoped you would. Don't let the flame go out. Keep Marcus's name alive. Elijah. Daniel sat there for a long time, the words blurring through his tears. He reached into his pocket and took out the small toy doctor, now worn smooth by time. He placed it on his desk beside the badge, two symbols of who he had been and who he had become. The candle from the chapel still flickered in his mind, and in a quiet room, he whispered the same promise he had made years ago: every life matters.